Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. We do live streams every night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Today is Saturday, July 21st, 2018. And the title of tonight's show is What's Up with the Rent Relief Act? The Rent Relief Act was introduced by Kamala Harris of California, Senator Kamala Harris. And we're going to discuss the implications of that bill if it has a chance of passing. But first, let's take a look at what happened during the day. As I like to say on the weekends, there's less news, not because less news happens, just because less people are reporting on the news. Now, the gold and silver markets are indeed closed, but for those of you who missed, let's do a recap of the precious metals markets as they closed on Friday. Gold closed the week down. It closed at 12.31, although it closed on a positive note at the end of the week. Silver, the same thing, closed down on the week, but closed up on Friday at 15.51. Platinum saw a rally back over 800 to 825. Palladium at 889. Copper, very interesting to be following. Copper during the year had risen from about a year ago, from about 271, and as recently as about February 10th or so, it was about 3.25 a pound, and now it is down to 271. So it's gone up and right back down, and most of that loss has happened since February. It's really declined. It's actually at its peak in February. So this is all in anticipation. They say, Dr. Copper is a harbinger to a recession. I'm just noticing the chat. It says chat disconnected. Oh, we're connected again. So if you want to leave a message there, well, I'm going to test out the chat right now with a buy your Smaulgld mug and see if it hits the chat line. There it is. We are successfully connected on chat. Okay. And the Dow Jones actually closed up as at 25,000 during the week. NASDAQ, S&P also higher. The U.S. dollar index fell on remarks in the middle of the week from President Trump, claiming he did not like the fact that the Federal Reserve was raising rates. And he does have a point. During the Obama administration, they raised rates once in December of 2015. They talked about raising rates a lot after they finished QE in 2014, but they really didn't pull the trigger for a year after talking about it, and then they didn't pull the trigger again until after the election when Trump won. Since then, they've raised rates 5 times, in addition to the 2 times that they raised them in Decembers of 2015 and 2016. And he had warned that if rates were to rise, there would be a problem in the economy. Now, he's been jumping up and down saying the economy is doing well, but now he suddenly seems to be concerned that the Fed is on a relatively aggressive rate hike, especially when you compare it to other central banks. Keep in mind, the Fed has raised the Fed's fund rates to 1.75 to 2%, while all other major central banks are at 0 or negative, and they're also still doing some form of quantitative easing, while the Fed is not doing that and is actually involved in some light quantitative tightening and selling of assets. So something to look out for is the potential battle between the Fed and Donald Trump. There's really not much he can do about it, but he can complain to the Fed and to Jerome Powell. And the Fed may listen because they have mentioned that one of the uncertainties in the economy is this trade war, these tariffs. If indeed it puts an uncertainty into the macroeconomics, the Fed would probably be wise not to raise interest rates, given that they can model out the way they see the economy, but they can't really model what the potential impact would be of the tariffs. And Trump is talking about now increasing the tariffs tenfold to $500 billion. So that may be enough if he does put those into place for the Fed to not raise rates. Also, the Fed doesn't want to get too far ahead of itself in any event, because while it does need to have rates high enough so that it can cut them in the event of a future recession, it doesn't want to have itself way out in front of all the other Western central banks and Japanese central bank. So it wants to not put too much room out there, because if it does, also the dollar's going to increase. It also raises the U.S. borrowing costs when the U.S. has made no headway into reducing its deficit. So that just means the cost of servicing debt is higher. So it would make sense for the Fed to not slam on the brakes, but maybe slow down the rate hikes and maybe essentially end them at this level, maybe a 2.25. All right, now let's talk about this. Oh, by the way, no, we're not finished. The mugs. I did ship out some more mugs, the Smaulgld Classic mug and the Smaulgld Super Classic mug. And some people asked about international shipping. I did get some quotes. They're all the same. To send, I had quotes from Australia, Israel, and the Netherlands. They're all $23.50 to ship. That's in addition to the price of the mug. So, what I decided to do tonight, and tonight only, if you buy a Smaulgld Classic or Super Classic mug, I will cover the international shipping today or tonight only if you're interested in getting your Smaulgld Classic and Super Classic mug. Also, over on the Patreon, the Patreon, I have 12 I'm very appreciative of them. Patrons, 12 patrons. I got a nice clean dozen. And they donate each and every month, and I have 2 new levels. The first 2 levels are the proletariat level. That's $2 a month. Then there's the bourgeoisie level. That's $5 a month. But I've added 2 new levels to the patron clubs. The Smug Mug Club. If you donate $25 a mug, your first month you will get the Smaulgld Classic mug as part of your patronage. Be shipped immediately upon your signing up to the Smug Mug Club. And the Super Smug Mug Club is $50 a month, and you will get both the Smaulgld Classic and Super Classic mugs upon joining. So please consider becoming a Smaulgld patron and supporting this channel. Now, for people who do live overseas, I'm also going to be adding new merchandise, Smaulgld merchandise, things that are less expensive to ship, less expensive than mugs, things like Post-its, magnets, Smaulgld magnets, and so on. They will all be game changers. All right, let's get to this economics. This is an economics night because we're going to be talking about the Rent Relief Act that was proposed, or the legislation proposed by Kamala Harris. All right, so Kamala Harris, yesterday, late in the evening, put this out. Nationally, over 21 million Americans spend more than 30% of their paychecks on rent. That's absurd. I introduced the Rent Relief Act to help ease the burden. This equals more money in people's pockets at the end of the year. All right, we're going to go through this. Now, she then has the press release. It was the day earlier. And she's talking about the cost of housing continues to rise in California and across the country. So she introduced this legislation. It's always for working families struggling to pay their bills. The Rent Relief Act would create a new refundable tax credit. Now keep that in mind. It's a tax credit to put more money in pockets of families at a time when renters' wages have remained stagnant and housing costs have increased rapidly. Now Senator Harris, was joined in the introduction of the bill by her fellow senator, the senior senator from California, Dianne Feinstein, and then she was also joined by Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut and Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire. And they are all talking about how there's an affordable housing crisis that has left too many families behind who struggle each month to keep a roof over their heads. Now, they have correctly identified an issue in the United States. And I always say that oftentimes people who correctly identify issues are then the ones who appear to be the experts and are therefore tasked with trying to fix them. And often that's the furthest from the truth. I think anyone can spot a train wreck, but not everyone can prohibit a train wreck from happening in the future. And I view this, and we're going to go through it, this is a potential train wreck, and I don't think it will get passed. But Senator Blumenthal is talking about how his 140,000 low-income Connecticut families struggling to pay the rent, this will provide them with much-needed relief and flexibility. So the idea here is there's an intention, you could say it's a good intention, to keep the price of rent down. keep in mind, they're not talking about mortgages. This is just renters. Senator Hassan, as far too many families scramble to afford the cost of living, we must find solutions to our affordable housing crisis. Now, we'll see if this is a solution. All right, so they're all behind this bill, and let's go through what the bill is. Let's see, Dianne Feinstein. Now, my initial reaction before we go through the ins and outs of this is actually going to have the opposite impact. Instead of helping the people, I believe, if you think this one through, this means landlords are going to raise rates and renters will pay more knowing they're going to get a tax credit, which means the taxpayers are going to subsidize the higher rent, which is bad economics. And it seems to be the big winner in this is going to be the landlord, because he or she is going to get, or they, if it's a corporation, are going to get their rent increase pretty much guaranteed. I'm not quite fond of that. All right. Now, this also reminds me, before we get into it again, is you have to look at analogous types of circumstances where they've done this before. Look at colleges. The idea that they want everyone to go to college, and college needs to be affordable. Or let's take healthcare. Healthcare needs to be affordable. So the government subsidizes or guarantees loans in order to make sure that everyone can have healthcare or college. And what happens? Well, colleges now have artificially high tuitions, and then they fundraise. This is incredible. They fundraise on the idea that it costs $60,000 to send a kid to one of their schools. So it doesn't. That's just the price that they charge and they're able to charge. So it's almost like Hollywood accounting. I guess it's college accounting, university accounting, where they can say that the cost of sending a kid is this expensive. We have to give a scholarship out for this price. So the cost of sending a kid to our school is $240,000. And then the people who don't get the scholarships, they have loans, and those loans are guaranteed by the government. And the cost of college, it doesn't cost $60,000. I'm sure it doesn't. The cost of delivering an education, you would think, would have gone down over the last 20 years with the ability to use online resources. You don't have to keep your library up in the same way that you used to. And yet they charge more, and they still use overpriced textbooks, physical textbooks. So you've seen where the government guarantees student loans that the students aren't paying less. The idea that now there's less of a burden on the students because the government is helping. No, they've made it worse. It's more expensive to go to college. And also the government is saddled now with guaranteeing these loans, of which, if you read or studies that have analyzed the portfolio of debt, it's between 40 and 50% are actually in default, and maybe another 10-15% are close to default. So basically, the government has eaten up all this debt. The students can't discharge it in bankruptcy. And who's the winner? The universities, because they got their tuition. And who's the loser? The student, because overpaid for the education, can't afford to pay back the loan. Who else is the loser? The government, because they're stuck with these loans. And ultimately, that means the taxpayers are stuck with the loans. So it's basically a transfer from the taxpayer through the student to the university. So a tax credit now for housing, the way it works is they're saying if somebody's paying 30% rent of their income, 30% of their income, and they get some type of tax credit. Now, if you think this one through, is the people who pay the 30% rent and get subsidies, they obviously pay less in tax, which means those who don't get the subsidy pay taxes to cover the shortfall in taxes not collected, which means either the deficit increases or the taxes have to be raised. And also, this scheme doesn't cover those with mortgages. So one part that's disturbing about this is it only impacts those who are at that threshold of the 30% rent. And keep that in mind, because that's going to be something, obviously, people who want to get the credit are going to be striving. if they're close to it, they're going to want to get to pay 30%. So they're not going to be worried about a rent increase, and they're going to look for apartments maybe that are a little more expensive than their 25% that they had budgeted, because they know, well, if they have to pay more and it's 30%, they'll get a tax credit for it. And of course, that's going to make the landlords raise the price of their apartments, which is supposed to be what they're trying to avoid here. They're trying to make rents more affordable. Now, the other argument that Kamala Harris and her sponsors are saying is that if these people get the subsidy and they pay less, therefore they'll have more money. That's the idea. And they're going to have more money, and if they have more money in their pockets, they're going to go out and spend that money, and that money creates jobs, and therefore when they create jobs, those people who have the jobs, and they pay taxes. But more likely what's going to happen is just like college subsidies, the tuition goes higher, people pay more and still don't have the extra cash, because in the example I just gave, and we're going to go through a few examples, is people will get the subsidy, but if the subsidy just covers their rent, they're not going to have any extra money left over. They're just basically going to get to stand still, and the landlord's going to get the money, and the landlord's not going to spend it. Maybe he'll invest in more apartments and buy more houses, and therefore there'll be less housing stock to buy because the landlord will have the money to buy them, and then he'll be able to charge more to people who want to rent it, who are going to get the subsidy to rent it. So this is and we're not even done with the negatives on this. So that would mean that people that are low income would not only get the earned income tax credit, they'd make money on that, and then they'd also be able to step up their housing, or at least initially get to pay more. They may not get a better place, but they can pay more for the housing because of the subsidy. Now, if they get that in a refund at the end of the year, all they've done is subsidize the landlord. I don't know how this helps the low-income people, but there is a thought in here, is that it's very clever. Now, you can look at this with a jaundiced eye, and you can say, are they really solving this problem? And I've only given you a few possibilities of what might happen. It sounds like they're not reducing the price of housing or rents. Why would they do this? Well, when you first throw this out there, if you're in a position, and there are a number of people, there are numerous people in this position where the rent is too high, and someone tells you, a politician tells you, we're here to help. You know, the old, I'm from the government and we're here to help. That sounds good. Oh, okay, well, great. So, all right, so now I don't have to worry as much about paying my rent because I get this tax credit. Well, the politician now has a captive group of voters who think they're actually getting something, but they're really not. And then, of course, the powerful interests, if there's landlord companies and other real estate companies, they like this because it ensures that their rent hikes will go through and they can charge more. And you would think you're not solving the problem. What you're doing is, in a sense, getting votes from the people who think they're getting something, and perhaps the real beneficiary are the powerful landlords who then can donate to your campaign, and you can push forth this type of economics as being for the people when it's really not. It's for the donors. Now, I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if the landlords in California are that big in order to have this type of power. I actually think they're putting this through is just because I don't think they've thought it through economically. The other thing is, remember, with national legislation, this has always disturbed me, the way they look at things. If you make $100,000 and you live in San Francisco, you're close to the poverty line. I'm joking, but you're not really. You probably pay 50-60% of your wages in rent. But if you make $100,000 elsewhere in the country, let's say Alabama, you're rich, but yet they treat everyone across the country equally. So this legislation is more likely to help those in California, and that's why Kamala Harris and Dianne Feinstein are supporting it. And again, all you have to do is look at the college courses, college costs over the past 20 years. They've just gone higher. The whole idea is supposed to be affordable. Or look at the Affordable Care Act. When you give out subsidies, what happens is the insurance companies raise the price of the insurance knowing that the subsidy is going to be covered. And then what do the healthcare providers do? They raise the prices of their healthcare provisions knowing that the insurance company is going to pay for it. So when you try to inject the government into economics, you're basically creating a third-party intervention that has unintended consequences. So I view this as you're using the renters, the people, by giving them tax credits. Some people just, they look at it very basically and they're saying, oh, it's just free stuff for the renters. They get their rent paid. It's actually worse than that, because the renters really don't get anything for free. They basically get to stay where they are. The renters are being used, and the tax credit that they get is a conduit to transfer money to the landlords, because the landlords are going to get paid. And that's where the taxpayers are actually subsidizing the landlords' rent increases or high rents. And so they end up being, they're supposed to be the beneficiaries of this, the renters. They become the conduit to paying the landlords higher rent. In a normal situation, if you can't pay your rent to the landlord, he decides to raise your rent 5%, well, you move to maybe where the rent is cheaper. Unless this Rent Relief Act comes in and says, well, you know what? You don't have to worry about that. You can pay that increase. Why? Because we're going to cover the cost of it with a tax credit. So the big winner in this is the landlord, not the renter. Because the renter is basically, if he was already stretched and he was paying what he was paying, the price goes up a bit. It's like, okay, I'll pay it, thanks, because the government's going to pay it. But the one who's never been harmed in all of this and is actually making out is the landlord, because as Camilla says at the beginning, people's wages aren't rising while the cost of living may be rising, but the landlord's not suffering at all because he's able to increase his rent and get the government to pay for it. Now, I don't know how they've missed this. I don't know if these, when they put together legislation, whether they just draft it so that it passes the political test and not the economics test. But I'd like to see if they've actually thought this one through more. So the free stuff goes to the landlord, not to the renter, really. And the poor renter gets the tax credit, and it just shuttles that along back to the landlord. It's the socialism for the bourgeoisie. It's not socialism for the poor renter. And again, this doesn't cover people who have mortgages. And you're just subsidizing the landlords and the future increases that ever they want to put out. But the way they're pitching this is that this is a big deal for the people. Now I'll give you an example how this would work, and you can see how this will ripple through the society. Renter A makes 40 grand, 40 large, and they find a place for $900 a month, which is about 27% of their income. Then they also see another place, a better place, for about $10.50 a month, and that place is 31.5% of their income. Now, which one are they going to take? Because if they take the one with 30, that's over 30%, they're going to get a tax credit. If they take the cheaper place, they're not going to get anything. So, renter A is going to take the place for $10.50, and he's going to thumb his nose up at the $900 a month place. So now you have a situation where the subsidy is allowing renter A to trade up for no reason other than why not? I mean, he's paying more, he deserves more. I don't know why he deserves more, but the place for $900 a month was fine. But the place for $10.50 is a little better. So renter A can get a better place than he otherwise could. Now renter B comes along. Renter B makes less money than renter A. Renter B makes 35 grand. And he finds a place for $800 a month. But that's only 26, 28% of his, not enough to get the subsidy. He then goes and looks at the place that renter A passed on, the $900 a month place. But you would think if renter A passed on a $900 a month place, that the landlord would have to either lower his rent or just try to hope to rent it at $900. No, he raises it to $950. Why? Because he knows that renter B only makes $35 large, and if he raises it to $950, then renter B is over the 30% threshold, and bingo, he gets a tax credit. So now you have in the permanent stock of rentals, a place that was $900 has just been boosted up to $950, so that someone who's making even less than the guy who's making $40, the guy's making $35, is going to pay more for it because he gets the subsidy. And you can see, if you just keep going down the line, how all is a whipsaw effect. The landlords will just keep raising prices, and everybody will just keep pushing their limit up to get to the 30%. Now, if they're already at 30%, fine. But still, you're going to have the impact of raising rents. And I don't see how they haven't thought this through, because people are thinking that, again, the first thought is, oh, well, this will allow people who aren't making much to get a better apartment. And that's true. But eventually it just won't be a better apartment. It'll just be a more expensive apartment, as we saw in the example with renter B. Renter B got a $900 apartment for $950 because renter A passed on that one and moved up to a $1,050 apartment. So renter A got a better apartment, was allowing the government to pay for it, but actually renter B just paid more for a $900 apartment. So he didn't win. But who won? The landlord in that example. So it's always, well, not in this case, it seems to be this is welfare for the landlord. So the landlords will raise the rent, and people will seek out or just end up paying for higher rent apartments, knowing the government's going to take care of it. You see it in healthcare, it's the same thing. Insurance companies and healthcare providers get paid, and they get their price increases too, because they know the government will take care of it with a subsidy. Now, your question is, why don't they just do tax cuts? See, because when you get this subsidy, you have to use it for, just like the healthcare subsidy, you have to use it for healthcare. So the money gets funneled into the healthcare industry, into the insurance industry. When you get the rent subsidy, if this thing passes, it has to be used to pay rent. So you have an artificial stimulus of these economies, so to speak, and the stimulus has the impact of just raising the prices of education or healthcare, or in this case, rental properties. So these programs, I don't think, are helping the middle class or the poor. They're lining the pockets of the service providers, like landlords, who in turn could perhaps donate to politicians who promote these subsidies. And then, of course, it does gain the votes of people. If people aren't paying attention, the ones who are going to get the subsidies, they don't fully understand that the global impact of this is to raise their rent and raise everybody else's rent. They don't care, because if they were running a standstill, and they're still running a standstill, but they're allowed to keep running, and the government is just topping them up, they think it's a good thing, not realizing that they're not getting ahead. Because all that's going to happen is the landlord will raise the rent and the government will cover the increase. At least that's how I see this. Now, I'm trying to figure out if I'm wrong here, but it seems like this is, California, San Francisco, 2 California senators promoting this. Connecticut senator promoting it. Very expensive on the coast. Rents could be $2,000, $4,000 a month just for average, very modest apartments. Now, under the Kamala Senate bill, you can qualify up to $100,000. Under the congressional bill, there's a congressional bill, and it's introduced by the guy who lost to Ortega-Cortez, whatever her name is, the one from the Bronx. That one goes up to, there's another bill there that goes up to $125,000. So this basically covers a wide swath of the population. She says 21 million. She's trying to cover the rent increases by the government rather than attacking why are the prices of the rents as high as they are in the first place. Well, the way I look at this is the reason that the prices are high on the coast is that's where financialization has boosted many people's fortunes, not everyone's, but through quantitative easing and through the Fed's actions of low interest rates and so on, they created the housing bubbles and they created the stock market bubbles. And that allowed a significant amount of people and foreign investors to overpay for houses and also to have stock portfolios that are huge or even crypto portfolios that are huge. But the quote average person may not be benefiting from asset valuations and they just have a decent job and they don't have stock gains or real estate gains and they rent and I get it that it doesn't make sense, but I don't think that this helps at all. I think this exacerbates the issue because the problems this is you're attacking it with more intervention. It's like making more plastic surgery on Michael Jackson's face when you've already destroyed it through too much plastic surgery. So you've got this unintended consequences of trying to fix something that structurally is broken, and doing this isn't going to help. And it's obvious. We've seen with colleges and healthcare, and now with this, if you can use this as a potential, just look at what's happened with healthcare and colleges. Those things rise when the government gets involved and when they try to subsidize or level out the playing field. And when they're not involved, you don't see that type of inflation. Why has college tuition increased so dramatically over the past 20 years? It's not more expensive. They're not buying more books. They're buying fewer books. It's not more expensive. They're not paying the professors that much more money. They're getting cost of living. They're able to do it because they can. And it's even more unbelievable. Not only do colleges get these subsidies, but they have massive endowments. Massive amount of people donate to them, and then they say it's because it costs a lot to send Johnny to give Johnny a scholarship when it doesn't really cost the university that much. It's what they charge for it. It's not they've got a built-in profit margin. That's probably, you never hear what it is, but I'm sure it's 90% after they pay to keep the grounds and pay the rent on the buildings and the teachers. I guarantee you when you put 50, 60 kids in a classroom and pay the teacher and the rent around that there's massive amount of profit involved, and that the tuition is at the tuition prices that they pay. But you don't see these massive increases in price for things like cell phones or televisions or refrigerators. They've gone down in price. Now, when they start talking about subsidizing cell phones for people because they're too expensive, well, then that's why your cell phones price will go much higher. Well, that's it on that. I wanted to bring that to your attention. It's a very interesting economic case study, and we'll see what if this thing has any legs. I think since it's sponsored by Democrats, it's probably not going to pass in this session. This may be something they may want to run on. They may say that, look, the economy isn't that good. The fact that there's still people struggling, minimum wage, or they can rile up a certain amount on that. But this one I think is easy to dismantle because I don't think that it actually will help people meet their rent obligations in any way that's meaningful, because it's just going to make the rents go higher. All right, let's see what some of the comments are. All right. Hi, Master Gold Trader, says Gus the Broken. Poppy Stuff is here. Hello. It will have the opposite effect. Absolutely. What every man should have. Copper PMs used to increase with oil prices. This year it's upside down. Yes, indeed. Platinum is near 10-year lows and oil is at 3-year highs. Very strange things going on. You could explain them, but then also they're somewhat inexplicable. Yeah, Pad, the rent is too damn high. I think he ran for governor in New York a few years ago. I had him in mind when I was talking. And the most knowledgeable, wow, my spelling is off. Double Dutch, okay. Joshua Roberts, more crony capitalism from the left. That is clearly, if indeed, now I don't know if that is. It just could be economic ignorance, because if there's no one on the other end, meaning there's not a lobby of landlords that are going to benefit from this. I mean, the landlords will benefit from it, but if they're not organized in a way that they're contributing to the senators and the political apparatus in California, this is just a gift to them and under the guise of helping the people. All right, let's see what other questions we got here. Communism works until they turn out other people's money. Well, this is, as I mentioned, this is socialism for the bourgeoisie if the landlords are the main beneficiary. It's not like they're taking money, really. I don't think the renter is the big winner in this. As I mentioned, the renter just gets to run the stand still, and they're basically saying, yeah, you're having trouble meeting your bills. We'll meet your bills even if they go higher, but the person who's charging the bill is the one going to make the money. 1.3, says Joshua, trillion student plus loan bubble is not an accident. No, it's unbelievable. That has impoverished, and you can't extinguish that debt. So people have paid more. Well, now you're allowed to go to college, and they've paid more for the privilege to do so. And the college degree is worth less. And well, actually, when people say something is worthless, they mean it's worth zero. But worth less means worth less compared to what it was worth before. And a college degree is worth less today than it was 30 years ago. You could write your ticket if you graduated with a college degree, because not everyone went to college. Not everyone could afford a college. It's interesting, college is more expensive today, and yet more people can afford to go to college. And yet the degree isn't worth as much. I mean, the only degrees that are worth anything that you can say, well, if I graduate, I'm going to get my money back, my return on investment. And those are either going to be at the very top schools, Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. Anything after that, I think you're on your own. But or in the places where you study something specifically that you need to go to college, and whether it's law or maybe accounting or some math or science. But most of the people getting degrees are not getting math and science degrees. That's why we in the United States have to do the M1 visas, whatever they're called, to bring in foreigners, because they will spend the time in those disciplines. I read the graduation rate on math and science majors is under 10% for native-born Americans. They just don't finish those courses. So if that's what you can finish with and get a good job on, well, then it makes sense to go to college, but you got to put in the work. If you're just going to take liberal arts studies or general studies, it's just an extension of high school as far as I can see. All right. The globalists want to incrementally, Joshua says, dismantle the West. Pretty simple. Yeah, I don't know if this is part of that, but let's see. Student loan debt is the nation's largest asset. Yes, there's all that money pad that's going to come in from the student loans. They can keep it on their books as a performing loan when it isn't. All right. Joshua says, you learn one thing in my line of work, there are no such thing as coincidences. There's a story about FDR saying, but apparently he didn't say it, but they attribute it to him, as nothing in politics happens by accident. All right. Tax credit for housing is communism. I don't know if it, I think it's more of, you might call it fascism if it's the marriage of the state and the corporations, if the corporations are the ones who are getting the benefit from if they're the ones who are renting the apartments out. So it would be a transfer payment from the government to the corporations, and then they would just raise the prices on the citizens. See, in communism, it would all be commonly owned, and the landlord wouldn't benefit for the increase in rent because they wouldn't get an increase in rent. And the government and the people would own everything. And it would be government housing, and you would have... So it's not the same. I wouldn't call it communism. I would call it more a type of, as you said in the beginning, crony capitalism, fascism. Ocasio-Cortez, who I suggest we start calling Crazy Eyes, loves the people. Yeah, she's trying with this universal basic income distributing cryptocurrency. I don't know where the money comes from universal basic income. I've studied that, and the only place it works is where there actually is something like, for example, in Norway, where the government owns the oil resources, and the people therefore are entitled to the resource, not necessarily the work and the exploration and so on, but that the government should get a piece of the profit from the exploitation of the resource. And that profit can go back to, if they have a surplus, obviously, could go back to the people in the form of a payment. But just to guarantee universal income without having the means to pay for it is different. So, for example, if the United States became tariff central and everyone wanted to sell stuff to Americans for whatever reason, and the tariffs were so high and they were 90% and people willing to pay them, and the United States had no debt, no deficit, and money was pouring into the country, everyone wanted to pay the tariff to the United States, and the United States had a $2 trillion surplus, well, they should distribute that money to the people, because what else is the government going to do with it other than spend it or waste it or whatever? But that's not really universal basic income as what's the word, guaranteed. That's just if the government happens to run a surplus because of its good fortune or good management, then the people would get the money. All right, what else have we got here? Am I right? Carl Joseph DeMarco, free ice cream. All right. Joshua Roberts, this is great deconstruction here by Lewis as usual. Thank you. Carl Joseph DeMarco, can't hide Josh, your shining star in my Twitter feed. All right. Let's see. When people use foul language, this isn't my censorship, but I would censor it anyway. You get, I have a filter on, it gets automatic. Well, Google or whatever this is, YouTube has a filter on, and it gets hid. So I won't read those out loud, and other people aren't seeing them. The Dems have no platform but to give away free stuff. Well, giving away free stuff historically is the best thing you can do as a politician. It doesn't cost you anything, and you can give it away, and you can get votes on it. But this one, I don't see how you're getting anything with the subsidy. If you're not paying attention, I guess you could fall in line and say, yeah, thank you, I'll take that. Yeah, rent's too high, I'll take the tax subsidy. Yeah, I'll vote for that. But it's not the same as, see, a tax cut, I think, is more attractive to someone, or a earned income credit, or an increase in food stamps, or an increase in something. But this, to me, I don't know, maybe I'm looking too deeply into this, just seems like it's a scheme to pay the landlords, not a scheme to get the people lower rent or to help them, really. All right. Let's see. There's some private conversations going on here. I'm not going to go through those. So Pat says, so this tax subsidy is a way to funnel cash to those mega corporations. Well, if you're right, and I'm not quite familiar with the structure of the rental market across California or even across the world, but if it is indeed, and I don't know the percentage that are owned by huge mega conglomerate corporations, like for example, I know Berkshire Hathaway has a lot of properties. I don't know if they're rental, they could be behind this, they could be beneficiaries of this. From what I've seen, and I know through anecdotally, but not through data, is that there are a lot of mom and pops who also are buying apartments and renting them. Now, what percentage of the rental stock they take, I don't know. What percentage are mega corporations? But that was the first thing I thought of, was that this could easily be a way of paying back the corporations that do the renting under the guise of using the renters as the way to transfer that payment and getting them behind it as well. So you have a situation where you rile up the poor to pay the rich. All right. Let's see here if we got anything else here. All right. No, that's about it. There's a lot of good comments here, but well, Roger here from Australia, in my country, forgotten workplace skills of experienced tradesmen like diesel mechanics are becoming higher in demand. It's quite easy for a mechanic to earn over 6 figures without a degree. Good day there. I guess that's yeah, well, that's a different type of economy. All right, sorry for the bad Australian accent there. All right, I want to thank everyone for joining me tonight, and this will be up later, and I will put together some notes on this discussion tomorrow on the blog post. Thank you very much for joining me tonight, and join me each and every night at this time at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time.